Hello everybody. I'd like to start today by asking you a question. Why are you still alive? And this is not an existential question. This is not a philosophical question, but a biological one. And the answer is you're still alive as a multicellular organism because of your immune system. And so today I would like to introduce you to the incredible immune system you possess. I'm not one who likes to propose that the natural world is out to get you, because in fact, if we were to do a reckoning of all the species on Earth, we would find that the great majority are either beneficial to us as human beings or have no real effect on us as human beings, and that only a very few are out to get us. And those organisms that can make us ill by attacking us from within are called pathogens. They are agents that cause disease when they enter the body. There are a number of common types, bacteria being one, and the way bacteria harm the host, which is you, when you get a bacteria, we consider you the host. The way bacteria harm the host is by destroying or consuming host cells. Another way bacteria can harm you is by releasing toxins. And this is much of what happens when you get food poisoning or when you get E. coli poisoning. These bacteria produce a toxin, and then you absorb that toxin in the large intestine when you reabsorb all that water, or in the small intestine when you absorb your food and the poison comes along with it. Viruses, which we've all heard of, especially in the time of COVID-19, viruses are bits of genetic material, DNA or RNA, that are wrapped inside a protein capsule called a capsid. And sometimes that whole megillah is wrapped inside a cell membrane. And the viruses enter a healthy cell and take over the transcription and translation machinery to make more and more copies of themselves, which eventually burst forth from the cell and are able to infect millions of other nearby cells. Another type of pathogen are fungi. They can be singular or multicellular, and these pierce host cells and utilize the contents. And finally, we also have parasites, which are organisms, including protozoa and some worms, that feed on the host, but typically they're not out to kill it. Whereas a bacteria or a viral infection that is left unchecked will in fact kill you most of the time. The immune system is a dispersed group of organs and vessels that function to give you protection from all of these, but particularly from bacteria and viruses. It's a network of lymph vessels, which are spread throughout the body and act as a sort of alter circulatory system, as well as several organs such as the thymus, the spleen, the tonsils, the adenoids, and the Peyer's patches in the small intestine, and the appendix in the large intestine, and then the bone marrow, where the blood cells are generated. It's a dispersed group of organs and vessels, and that makes sense because pathogens can enter your body from numerous locations. The immune system works by being able to distinguish between cells of the body, the self, and from cells of pathogens, the non-self. Proteins that are embedded in the plasma membrane of all cells or in the capsid of viruses are what we call marker molecules, and they allow the immune system to distinguish the self from the non-self. During development, your immune system learns the markers of the body, so it won't attack your own cells. But when the immune systems encounter foreign markers, they mount an attack known as the immune response. And that's what we're going to end up studying for the next two talks. Anything that causes an immune response is called an antigen, and that is such an important word you need to get used to it and accustomed to hearing it and accustomed to using it. In your immune system, the key players are the white blood cells. There are about 5 to 6 types of white blood cells, and white blood cells are, you'll often hear referred to as leukocytes. Some of the white blood cells release chemicals when they detect an antigen, and these chemicals cause changes in the behavior of other nearby cells or even of the entire body. So some just run around detecting antigens and then send out the alarm. Others actually act like amoeba and phagocytose, meaning they ingest inside a vesicle these pathogens, and then they merge them with a lysosome, and the lysosome destroys them down into their building block molecules. And yet other white blood cells produce pathogen-specific responses that not only defeat the current infection, but lead to future and continuous immunity to the pathogen. So we're going to discuss all these concepts. But before we do that, we're going to look at white blood cells themselves and look at the different kinds and categorize them. Here we see a map of the stem cells that are found in the bone marrow, and that they can give rise to several other kinds of cells, which then mature into all of the cellular components of the blood. And we're not going to really be concerned in this course with how that happens or all the stages they go through. That will be something for you to do as you take more advanced biological courses. But right now, what we want to say is these stem cells can produce red blood cells, which are responsible for the transport of oxygen around the body, and then all these white blood cells, which are categorized into other categories. But the names I want you to hear right now are basophils, eosinophils, neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes. And as an aside, these stem cells in the bone marrow can also turn into platelets. Here is a table of the different functions of white blood cells. Basophils, they patrol the bloodstream looking for antigens and release chemicals that cause what's called inflammation when the antigens are encountered. Mast cells have a similar function, but they do it in body tissues other than the circulatory system. Neutrophils are a phagocyte, meaning they engulf pathogens in a vesicle and destroy it. Macrophages do the same thing, but they're the ones that take care of bacteria. Lymphocytes not only have the ability to destroy infected cells of the body, and later we're going to ask why would you want to destroy a body cell, but they also produce proteins known as antibodies that inactivate the pathogen. And finally, eosinophils inject parasites with poisons. So those are some of the roles played by the white blood cells. Now, there are two generalized immune responses which are important for you to understand. One is called inflammation and the other is called fever. So let's look at each of those. Whenever a tissue gets damaged or a pathogen is detected, the body swells in that area, it gets red, it itches, and it gets warmer. And those symptoms are called inflammation. How does this happen? Well, these white blood cells that can release messages, for example, the basophils, release a chemical called histamines in response to an injury or in response to the detection of guests, these pathogens. Histamines cause the nearby capillary walls to spread apart and allow plasma to leak out and become interstitial fluid. And it also allows white blood cells to leave the circulatory system and head towards the site of infection and injury. Can you guess why the inflammation response happens? Well, it's because the body has evolved to try to prevent any pathogen from gaining a foothold inside the body. So when you get cut, the body knows in an evolutionary sense that that's a source of potential pathogens, and therefore it sends the defense team out there to get those pathogens before they can get started in colonizing and eating your cells. So that's the inflammation response. Let's go on and talk about fever. In response to infection, and I just want to say that when we talk about infection, we're usually talking about bacteria or viruses. Certain white blood cells release chemicals that cause the hypothalamus, which is a gland in your noggin in your brain, to increase body temperature. So why in the heck would they want to give you a fever? We all know that fever is not fun, especially when you get to be my age. As my sister, the medical doctor, said, adults do not tolerate fever well. Well, low-grade fevers, those of approximately 100 F, do two things that help the immune response. They cause white blood cells to mature more quickly into pathogen-fighting cells. So this makes sense. The low-grade fever causes white blood cells to mature, and therefore you ramp up your army of pathogen fighters more quickly. The second thing is the low-grade fever stimulates the production of interferons, which are another kind of protein, in the infected body cells. And the interferons are then released by that infected cell, and they stimulate neighboring uninfected cells to produce enzymes that prevent viruses from entering them. So it's basically the fever activates the Paul Revere alarm system of cells and says, hey, the virus is coming, the virus is coming. Get your enzymes ready to attack it. And they're pretty good at that, but they're not always successful. Now, the problem with a fever is it's a tricky proposition. A high-grade fever, one of around 103 or greater, causes the hypothalamus to lose control of body temperature, and the body temperature can fluctuate much more widely. And above 103, enzymes start to denature, particularly enzymes in the brain. And as they start to denature, the body starts to have an increased chance of dying. So that is the second generalized immune response called fever. Now, what we want to talk about is immunity to a disease in the first place, or immunity that arises in response to a novel infection. So what immunity means is that when a pathogen enters your body, it will not be able to gain a foothold and make you sick. And there are two types of immunity, generally speaking. One is the immunity you are born with, the inherited immunity you get. You get white blood cells that can defeat, and it says 1,000 here, but it's millions to maybe even billions of potential pathogens. And you can thank your evolutionary history for this so-called passive immunity, which comes along with being born with your genetics. However, when a person encounters a novel pathogen, the immune system responds by producing cells and proteins specifically designed to defeat that pathogen. In addition, and this is a neat trick, the body produces cells that remember the pathogen and provide immunity against a second infection at a later date. This is called acquired immunity. Sometimes it's called adaptive immunity. And it's a pretty great trick of the immune system. And as a final thought, you can think that multicellularity couldn't have evolved successfully if it were not for a sophisticated immune system. Because a multicellular organism is just a giant hunk of food waiting to be consumed by certain bacteria and certain viruses. Certainly not the majority of bacteria, and probably not the majority of viruses either, because a lot of viruses don't attack humans, they attack other things. And we apparently also have some friendly viruses, especially in our mouth where these giant viruses live. So multicellularity could not have happened without an immune system to protect this giant resource from the point of view of a bacterium or a virus. So I hope today you have an understanding of what the immune system is, some of the organs and vessels that are involved in it, and the two generalized immune system responses, which are inflammation and fever, and the role that white blood cells play in conferring and maintaining an immunity to pathogenic organisms. Tomorrow, we will talk about acquired immunity and the incredible ability of the body to respond to new pathogens. See you then.